Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon Training presented by This.Labs. I'm Sarah with This.Labs and I will be your host. We're excited to bring you our next session, Getting Started in Web Design with CSS. Today's trainer is Kelly Mahoney, Design Lead at This. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You can find Kelly on Twitter using the handle shown at the bottom of the screen. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or feedback. Of course, JavaScript Marathon would not be possible without our sponsors. Our sponsor today is This.Labs, your partners in modern digital transformation. We specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. Find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. This.Labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. If you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle and want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. We have a ton of upcoming events for 2021. Our next week is State of You Community on the 28th. For more details, you can find all of these events on this.co. And of course, JavaScript Marathon returns March 24th. Follow us on this.labs on Twitter for more details. And with that, I'm going to hand it on over to Kelly.
Thanks so much. Alrighty, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm going to be talking about how you can get started in web design with CSS. So my name's Kelly. I'm the founder of Splash. You can check me out on Twitter. I'm also the design lead at This.Labs. I am a self-taught designer and hackathon addict, which is really where I got my start. And you can follow me at Splash on basically everything. So what I'm going to get into today, I'm going to cover a few topics. So the first one, I'm really going to dive into what is design. What does it mean? What are the different types of design? What's good design? Then I'm going to get into what is CSS, kind of go through the code aspect of it and see all of the cool things that you can do with it. Then I'm going to get into discussion of what is a library and what is a framework and what does it mean in terms of CSS. Then I'll follow that up with examples of both libraries and frameworks. And then we'll finish it up with a Q&A at the end. So make sure you have your questions ready, and I'm excited to answer them. So let's get into it. So what is design and why does it matter? So there's a bunch of different types of design. And so when you're looking to get into design, you can really pick, anything. You can specialize in one thing. You can be a design generalist. It's really up to you. So I kind of identified 6. There are plenty of more. These are just 6 bigger buckets of design. So the first one is visual design. That's going to be, like illustrations, artwork, graphics that you see on the web, or it can even be print illustrations. So visual design kind of encompasses everything art-based, I would say. The second is product design. So that's when we're talking about the design of physical goods, like the iPhone in your pocket, the AirPods in your ears. Those all had to be designed by somebody. 3 is a design systems designer. So that's going to be a person who constructs libraries of different design assets, and they create a set of design principles for a designer to follow. The 4th is motion design. So this is going to be motion graphics, videos, animations. This is really fun and honestly something I really want to get into. And it's like a little hobby on the side. So 5 is design marketing. So this is where you can work on, marketing materials. You can work in sales. You can create advertisements. You can work on, things for social media, etc. And then the last, but not the least, or not, the only, is UI UX design or web design. So this is, I like to call it digital product design because, as we are becoming more online, we are shipping products and these are actual products. And even though, they aren't physical, they are a digital product in themselves. And so that can include, websites, apps, or, SaaS offerings and so forth. So we're really going to dive into the UI UX design or web design today, and see how, CSS plays a part in that. So I really want to jump into, the 10 commandments of good design. And this is really important when you're talking about basically any design, but, specifically when you're talking about those digital products, when you're talking about those websites, when you're talking about those apps. So, it's innovative, right? You're not just recreating the wheel. It's useful. At the end of the day, you want these products to be used by somebody. 3, it's aesthetic. So, you can have your own design flair. You can be following a company's design system. It's understandable. So, as a user, I go in and I can just, I understand what you're trying to get me to do and how to do it. It's unobtrusive. So, the design isn't stopping me from doing anything or doing what you want me to do. It's honest. You're not trying to, pull the cover over somebody's head. It's long lasting. There's several great design systems that, have lasted throughout the ages, and only gotten better, right? 8, is thorough down to the last detail. You can, see whether, a pixel is off, or, this shade of blue doesn't match that shade of blue when they're supposed to be the same color. I really like this one, it's environmentally friendly. So we only have one Earth. Let's try to, keep it as long as we can. And 10 is kind of nice. It's keep it simple, right? It involves as little design as possible. Sometimes the best designs are the simplest designs. So UI versus UX. On a lot of job roles and a lot of, job postings and so on, you'll see UI UX designer. And there's some discussion within the community about, can someone truly be a UI and UX person? Or, is someone a UI person or someone is a UX person? So let's kind of go through what the differences are. And you can kind of, think about which one you like or however you want to handle that. So the user interface is going to be what you see on the screens. They're going to be the specific assets that a user interacts with. That's going to be your buttons, your images, your forms, your nav bars, your cards, all of the pieces that are making up the page. And then on the other hand, you have user experience. So what's the experience like when you're working with those assets? How nice is the experience? How obtrusive is the experience? Kind of going back to that 10 principles or 10 commandments of good design, right? So, and would the user want to keep coming back or refer others? That kind of is all encompassing in the experience. And then experience can even go outside of the product. It can be about the company. It can be about, after sales. It can be about customer service. So user experience is not just cannot just exist within the product itself, but everything kind of in around the product. So as I said before, you can get a job doing UI, or you can just get a job doing UX. There's a lot of UX researcher jobs if you don't necessarily, want to be in the design program designing, and you want to, research and provide that valuable data to the people who are making the designs. Or, as I said, and a lot of jobs exist, you kind of become a generalist in both. So what is CSS and why do you need it? So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. If you were to look at a website and that website were to be human, you have your skeleton of HTML. So that's, the directions you're telling the computer. And then you have the JavaScript, which gives, that website some movement. And then the CSS is going to be how it looks. And some great examples of that to really get into that. We can see it in the text editor itself. So when we have CSS in the text editor, you're going to have several different parts which make up your CSS code. And there are over 500 different properties. So almost every, if not every part of the web page can be manipulated by CSS. You're going to have your selectors, which are the body H1 and P. So you're selecting the item you want to design. You have the property, which is going to be like background color, color of the text, which is what color is. Sometimes people get confused on that, but color is going to be the text color. Text aligned, you want it centered, right or left. And then, the font family and the font size. So there's over 520 ways to manipulate the web page using CSS. So a really cool example is taking your favorite websites and stripping out the CSS just to see the impact that it has. So you can see that, by just adding the CSS to the Amazon webpage or, removing it, you have two wildly different experiences, right? The left is going to be very text-based, very, static, very, not a whole lot going on or not visually appealing. And then, on the right, you have this very dynamic, very aesthetically pleasing, rich, dynamic experience. So this is an example of Amazon.com. Here's a great example of GitHub.com. As you can see on the left, there's only actually a couple things on that page, but because we added CSS, it's now this really rich, inviting experience. This is an example of Stack Overflow, same deal, it's text-based really, and then, you add all of these colors and these gradients and all of these, formatting, and now you have this rich, welcoming, inviting experience. So now we're going to get into, what is a library and what is a framework? What do people mean when they're talking about a library and a framework, and which applies to CSS? Fun fact, they both do. So first I'm going to get started with library. So a library, normally when we talk about it, we're talking about a bucket of CSS elements that you can just drop in your code. They're often pure CSS, which means that you can use it without a framework. You don't really have to, call anything. You can just drop in the pure CSS and the browser will recognize what it's supposed to do. And you can kind of use it wherever and whenever you want. A framework, on the other hand, is a specific bucket of components, and that's going to be styled and constructed by the framework CSS file and by the JavaScript file. To use frameworks, you really have to be able to call it. So, at the top of your HTML file where you have all of your links, you're going to call that CSS framework. The nice thing about frameworks, and really what I want to dive into in this discussion, is that frameworks are an excellent way to get started in web design. If you know HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but you really don't feel that your web design skills are up to snuff, or want to learn a new skill, or make your personal portfolio really pop, just call a framework, and they've really done most of the work for you. So now into some library examples. So animate.css is a, just add water CSS animation. And because these are pure CSS, as I mentioned, you can really, take this, heartbeat or handshake or, flash. I'm reading on the right-hand side, and you can just drop that in your app without, having to do much else. CSS wand is another example of this. You can just copy and paste and, make your website beautiful or product beautiful, just as simple as that. And now frameworks, which are going to be the bulk of our discussion today. So what are you looking for when you are, looking into a framework? So Font Awesome is a great framework. Some people would say that this is a library, but you do have to call the Font Awesome style sheet in your code in order to use it, which is why I'm putting it in the framework category. But Font Awesome is an awesome way to put icons in your code, without having to upload the SVG, having to design your own icons. Font Awesome is a great way to get those icons right away. The next one, and actually Materialize has a special place in my heart. This is the first, CSS framework I ever actually used. I used it in all of my first hackathon projects, back in 2015. So this is all based on material design when material design was really getting started. This, has it kind of breaks down the grid system. You have your cards and buttons, and basically any component that you might need for your app, you can just copy and paste the code with your link to the style sheet in the top, and you have a start off design that you can really build on, change the colors, etc. One thing I really like about Materialize, and I feel like it really explains this concept well, is when you're getting into web design, there's this concept of the grid. There's this 12-column grid that allows you to, break up the web page. So you could have, 2 columns, 3 columns, technically up to 12 columns. And I want to pause here and use Materialize's example of the columns to just kind of explain this principle, right? So on your web page, you have these theoretical 12 columns, and most frameworks work off of this kind of 12-column grid. It's not something that you can just call in CSS. You kind of have to have your framework and then start manipulating the grid. But the grid's an awesome way to break up the page, make it a little more visually exciting. Not everything is just like boom, 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 boom. You can have rows. You can have your cool little pricing page, where you have like the 3 prices, and really understanding the 12 column grid, I think, is really important to really diving into these frameworks. Another tip that a lot of people, either have a hard time understanding or have to have a little practice with, is you can put columns inside of columns inside of columns. And so if you were to take, a 12-column, let's say, you made your div, 12 columns wide, and then you have another column, and that's 6 columns wide. And then even inside of that, you can do, 3 columns wide, and everything is going to live in that kind of family if we're talking about the whole parent and child concept. So really understanding that and making sure that you close your divs where you wanted to close your divs is really important when using these 12 columns. So another great framework is Bulma. They have, a bunch of these components, like in Materialize, the cards, the buttons, the menu, the drop downs, and so forth. And and all of these are already designed for you. They're already, all constructed in CSS. Once you have called this framework, all you have to do is copy and paste. And there it is, already designed. You can change the colors. You can make it a little more inviting. Ionic is also a really cool framework to use for mobile applications and web design. It's really neat when you're getting started in iOS development, because it can really, it's a quick way to get started with those different components that you want on your app, and kind of just start developing an app really quickly. Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a very common term that is used in the tech industry, and it's an even cooler CSS framework, because a lot of our modern day apps and websites really use Bootstrap as the core. So if you want to get started, Bootstrap is going to be probably the widest library that you can get started in, just because there's the community is so large. There's so many examples, and it's a really beginner friendly framework to use. So again, some more examples. You have this grid, you have the buttons, and you have the cards. So what's also cool is within their components, they have pages that are already built out for you. So an example like I talked about at the beginning with that grid is, they already have these full-blown web pages that are, already built out. And so if you're in a quick punch, or, you're at a hackathon and, you need a pricing page, this is really, copy and pasteable, that you can just take and put in your code. And, if your company color is blue, you can, if your company color is pink, you can just, boom, pink, right? And make all of these pink. Another, great example that Bootstrap has on their site is, a product landing page. So you can, just take their code and edit it to what makes, what fits whatever you're trying to build. Or, if you like this element here, this element there. And it really allows you to, get started right off the bat. And then, this blog, a lot of developers in the community are looking to write their own blog. And, a big question that there is, how do I start my own blog? What do I do? And Bootstrap already, has a blog built out for you. So, it's a great way to get started. It's a great, resource to use. And there's just a lot of fun ways to work within it. So, the kind of the last thing that I wanted to touch on before, we kind of see some of these work in real life is so a lot post that has gone popular around Twitter are the CSS works of art, right? You have these people who are building these full-blown, masterpieces, the Mona Lisa in pure CSS. And it really just blows my mind. I don't think I'll ever get there. CSS is really one of those things that if you put in the work and you try to really understand the core principles, you can make some really fabulous things with it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull, sorry. Hold on just a second, sorry. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Bootstrap's website, and we can kind of dig into it a little more. Let me share my screen. Alrighty, so, hold on. I think I might need help, Sarah. Thanks. Cool. Alrighty, so here we have the Bootstrap app, and I'm just kind of going to dig around into the examples that we can kind of go into and really try to understand, what's going on. So dashboards are really scary, especially when you're trying to do it from pure CSS. But here it is. Here's just a template in Bootstrap. And what I can do is I can go in and inspect what's going on here and just try to get, a little more understanding of, how things are laid out, why things are laid out. So let me put this. Alrighty, so if we look into, so if you didn't know already, there's this really cool feature in Google Chrome where you can inspect a web page and you can look at every single part of the web page. So let's just dissect this one a little bit so we can kind of see some of the things I talked about in action. So, I'm going to press this little arrow here and I'm just going to hover over what I want to look at. So alrighty, so we have this sidebar menu. So that's going to be a component that Bootstrap has that you can, just plug and play really easily, and boom, you have a side nav. You can kind of see that. So we can look at this really quickly and what this all means. So according to Bootstrap's principles, you can, and another great thing that I'll just kind of put in right here is responsive design is everything right now, right? Being able to have the same experience on a on an iPhone, you know, on an iPad, you know, on a computer. And so you have to be able to tell the computer that, hey, you know, on this size screen, this is what I want you to see, or this is how much of the page something should take up. So if we look at this sidebar menu, which is, you know, a common feature on a lot of websites, we see right here, so COL means column, MD means medium, so that's going to be like on a medium-sized screen. It's gonna we want it to take up 3 columns of that 12-column grid. So, you know, if we were to imagine that this is 12 columns long, you know, you have you have, you know, cut into fourths, because remember it's out of 12, so 3 divided by 12 would be 1/4. So you have, you know, 1/4 of the page covered by this side nav. What this piece after here says is that on a large screen, you want it to take up even less. So 2 out of the 12, right? So that would be 1/6. So that means, you know, on a really big screen, you know, probably like a 27-inch, probably even on a TV. I know some people put dashboards on TVs in offices. You know, you would really only want that taking up like the tiniest little bit. So, you know, so we have our nav ID. So another thing that you'll see within CSS is this concept of being sticky. So sticky means that no matter what I do with the page, it's going to stick to the side. You'll see that a lot on footers. You'll see that a lot on nav bars, because you kind of don't want things floating around, you know, especially on elements like I said, nav bars, footers, and sidebar. So you really want to be able to, you know, tell it to be sticky. So within this dev, we can look more at this sidebar, but let's move on to the main part of the screen. So again, you know, column on a medium screen, this is going to be 9 columns wide. So that's going to tell you that it's going to take up a majority of the screen, right? If we're doing that 9 out of 12 versus up here, you have that 3 out of 12. More cool stuff that we can see in this when we're talking about the Bootstrap framework. You know, you have these buttons. So here on the right, you can see that, you know, this is a button and it's going to take the style of a Bootstrap button, right? And so what the CSS file is telling it is that, you know, it's gray in color. It's going to use whatever, you know, your system UI font is. And really a really fun exercise, and something that I suggest to anybody who's really getting started in CSS is just go to their favorite websites, do that inspect feature, understand, you know, what stuff is where. And then once you are able to, you know, really dissect that page, you can understand, well, why did they put it there? Well, why did they put that there? You know, what if I moved the button, you know, from here to here? Does it still work? Does it still make sense? And that's what I did when I started. I, you know, really went in and started breaking down these page components. So another component, you know, that we see is this table. So tables are going to be, you know, really helpful when you want to display your information. What else? So at the bottom, you know, we're calling all of our JavaScript and all of that fun stuff. So let's go back into some more examples. Oh, I see some comments. Oh, cool. If anybody wants me to go through any of these, feel free to drop that in the chat, and, you know, we can go through that together, and feel free to ask any questions. So the next one I'll go into is this carousel. So a carousel is going to be, you know, especially on this example, you're going to have, again, these columns, and just really understanding the columns. If you haven't noticed, columns are really important. So that's, you know, a really great place to start if you're, you know, if you're getting started in this journey, to understand how things are laid out in the page. So we can go over here, hover over, we can see, you know, column large. So that means, again, you know, on a large screen, it's going to take up 1/3 of the page. We have these buttons, again, more buttons. This carousel is really fun. If you are getting started into HTML and CSS, I know I've pulled out enough hair trying to get a carousel to work. So the fact, that it's right here and usable is just phenomenal. So, you have your, let's see, your carousel, your indicators. So all of these are going to be identified by the framework itself that you can really just, drop in and get started. Are there any questions from anyone in the chat relating to Bootstrap specifically? Don't see anything yet. So yeah, if you haven't already, Bootstrap is definitely a great way to get started with CSS, because like I said, everything is copy and paste. You can just drop right in. You can browse themes. These frameworks are really there for you to get started. They're great for you to really get started. Some of these you do have to pay for these more built out, but if you're like me and kind of like to trial by learn things by trial and error, just really copy and pasting and so forth. So with that, I will open it up to questions if anybody has any.
So yeah, if anyone does have any questions for Kelly, go ahead and drop those in the comment box and we can get to them. If you are watching this later and it's not live, you can see Kelly on Twitter. She's at SocialBlush. I will drop that in the comment box as well as we wait if anyone has any questions. Okay. I think we're good. Kelly, that was wonderful. That was a wonderful session. It was really good to kind of dig into a little bit more CSS on my end as well. I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of other people did as well. So thank you so much. We are back in an hour. So our last session of the day with Marcus Hellberg. Join us at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern. We have one more before we leave. Lisa. So Lisa says, what is the most popular framework? Also, what were the frameworks you mentioned earlier?
So I would probably argue that Bootstrap is the most popular framework. I feel like it's the most common one used. Everyone in the dev community, I think, has their preference for CSS frameworks. So, there's so many, and the world's your oyster. As far as the other frameworks I mentioned earlier, there's sites like Ionic. So that's going to be for, iOS and app development. There's going to be Bootstrap, like I mentioned. There's going to be Bulma, which is another framework that I've used a little bit. And then Materialize, which I feel like now it's like quote unquote old.
Funny how that happens.
But it was the first one I touched with. I felt like it had the best documentation. It really told you why things were used and best practices, where sometimes, on a framework as big as Bootstrap, it can really feel overwhelming just because there's so much. So if you, don't mind the material design, Materialize is a really great one to start with, I think.
Great. Awesome. Well, with that, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we'll be back at 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see y'all soon.
Bye.